context, would love to jump into a little bit of the meat and potatoes of this session, which is, what do you do on the day to day? How do you run a tech organization? I've always been fascinated to understand how this happens, right? I keep hearing my friends talking about Jira tickets and Scrum Masters, and it sounds like completely alien speak to someone who's never worked in the software or the engine or the technology space like that. So maybe we start off right at the beginning. How do you approach this whole aspect? Like, you've built teams, you've inherited them, you've done both over a period of time now. So how do you approach this whole construct of a team, right? Like when you
Hmm.
think of a tech org and its building blocks, right? What does that
Hmm.
org design look like? And also when you're
Hmm.
adding people, when you're adding roles, when you're creating capabilities or functions, how do you link
Hmm.
that back to the core objective of the business, the constraints within which you have to operate, as you just mentioned? I think that would be a
Hmm.
great grounding before we get into some of the
Hmm.
specific aspects of how do you do hiring, how do you think about feedback and recognition, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
But maybe just to start with
Hmm.
that, like what's the
Yeah,
org chart? How does it come together?
sure,
Tell me a little bit
sure,
about it.
sure, sure. By the way, on Jira, there are, it's a very polarizing word. There are fans and there are absolute detractors, right? So just want to put it out there. And if you ask me which club I belong to, I'm not going to answer that. Okay, so coming to the tech outside of things, I think see there are certain any organization who see if you are doing a 0 to 1, assume that you're a 4 5 member team. I think that putting in too much structure is detrimental. I
Hmm.
think there is anyway significant amount of ownership. I think people in a 3 4 member team also will figure out uh, who takes what sort of ownership or depth, right? I mean, even if, for example, three founders come together and the three friends come together, build a company, there will be a natural selection that happens in terms of who does what, right? Same thing is true for engineering teams. There will be people who might be generalists. There could be people who are sort of specialists in front end, back end. Maybe there are people who understand the network side of things better than others. So there will be that kind of natural selection in terms of speciality, etc. But if I were to take, for example, Super Money, okay, Super Money as a platform today, all the way. So we are currently a 110, 120 member team in engineering. And while we are the top five UPI app today, we have been doing UPI for only 1.5 years now, not more than that.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I think a couple of days back we touched, I think, 10 million transactions a day, which was pretty phenomenal, I would
Yep.
say.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, but the fact of the matter is, we are competing in a very crowded space. Meaning, there is a phone pay, there's a Google Pay, there's a bunch of others, uh, Paytm, and these organizations are fairly mature from a technology standpoint. They would have learned from their mistakes and they have built a sort of their technology has evolved over time. But from a end customer standpoint, they don't care. They don't care if you are just a new kid on the block. It's not as if you are allowed to fail as a result of that, right? So it's important to understand the domain, your competition, who. So even, for example, when I was doing my own SaaS company, there was a product called as Percept Insight, which was a which is even today, I think, they're sort of they continue to operate fairly successfully. Was a replacement for Mixpanel and MoEngage put together, meaning it would
Okay.
do end-to-end analytics as well as do engagement. We saw that as a white space, and we sort of built it. Now, if you go to customers and say, "Hey, here's a replacement for, let's say, for example, Mixpanel," they are not going to give you any slack saying, oh, you guys are new, unless they are, of course there are well wishers, and I've been lucky to have people who have given me that opportunity to make mistakes even in the
Right.
context of perception side. uh, they generally people who are paying you money are not going to sort of say it's fine,
Of
if
course.
things
Of course.
break, right? So it's very important to firstly understand your domain. Where are you sort of competing in? And your tech organization should reflect that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, one of so as you might have realized, we are competing against some of the best in the industry when it comes to UPI. So our technology cannot be also ran. It has to be absolutely top notch, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
so so our structure has to reflect that. Now, what our structure also has to reflect is the fact that given that we are relatively a late entrant in the market, we probably have to build a better product than what
Of
else is in
course.
the market,
Of course.
right?
Of course.
Otherwise, why will people give you an opportunity?
Sure. Sure. Makes a lot
And
of
we have
sense.
to and we have to iterate fast, because we'll sort of put things out there, because it's impossible to know everything, right? A lot of times you end up building features and you get surprised that you thought the customers will use it a certain way, but they use it very, very differently, right? So you have to put it out there, and then you figure out, and then you have to course correct. So in the context of super money, the structure has to ensure that not only are you building things in a manner that uh, are competing against some of the best in the industry, be it in terms of resiliency, be it in terms of performance, be it in terms of latency, but you also have to enable your business to iterate and fail fast, right?
Right. Right.
And your structure has to reflect that, right? Now, that could be a different answer when you're sort of, let's say, going after a completely green field and you're experimenting with, let's say, no competition, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of course you're building a very, very good product, but you don't really know how things will pan out, right? So in those cases where you're absolutely 0 to 1, where you're a 3-4 member team, I would rather you allow the structure to evolve. Initially, I think it helps to keep it fluid. You have a set of principles. It's important to have strong principles, but it's also important to be flexible about when to change them, or when to sort of let those emerge over time, right? So horses for courses in some sense, right? I
Yes.
think,
Yes.
and
Yes.
and, and that is how it should sort of pan out. Not
And,
sure if
and,
I
and, to
answered
that,
your question, but
and to
yeah.
that effect, then if you take any of these examples that you mentioned, right, either what you were building yourself at your previous venture, or any of the roles
Yeah.
that you've done, right,
Yeah.
where either you were a category creator like Flipkart, right, or you're operating in a competitive space against incumbents like in Super Money, and so
Yeah.
on and so forth. Could you also give us a sense of now understanding now that look, this is where it's coming from, and this is the
Mm.
concept or the principle that has to be adhered to because these are your
Mm.
market imposed constraints. I'm coming back to the
Mm.
constraints concept because it's a very useful way to remember
Yeah.
discuss the remaining things that we're talking about.
Mm.
What did that look like in terms of org design? Like, what does that affect? Does it affect, say, the roles that you want to hire for, the functions that you want
Mm.
to create, the seniority and skill level of people that you want to get? Like, in some places, okay, I need to have the best, I need to already have somebody with 20 years experience as an architect in XYZ technology on day one in my team as a founding engineer, versus saying,
Mm.
hey, you know what? We can start off with younger generalists and we can figure it out over time. Right? I'm just trying to get
Yeah.
a sense of, on the
Yeah.
practical
Yeah.
terms,
Yeah.
what does that look like from a design
Yeah. Yeah.
and an org building perspective?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Before I answer that question, I'll give you an example of my one of my stints at Ola. So I was sort of heading Ola Play, and lots of conversations at the leadership level in terms of, and Ola was doing something with Ola Play that nobody had done before. Meaning, they had put a device at the back of the car, and it was getting controlled through a DXC, which is a driver device, right? And the idea really was to personalize that entire experience, and that really struck a chord with our customers, especially people who were going to the airport in the context of Bangalore. Of course, in different cities, different use cases, but a lot of when that was getting built, right? A lot of questions on why are you guys building this? What's the point? You just have some preload some movies, let it be. Why are you sort of when somebody books, you're sort of trying to personalize it, etc., etc., right? And I think Bhavesh made a good point at that point in time. And a lot of times, the customer doesn't know what they want,
Sure, sure, sure.
right? They don't know. I mean, if they've not seen a chat GPT in the past, they don't know what a chat GPT is, for example, right? And when you sort of if you have very high conviction, right? The reason I'm giving that example, by the way, is because sometimes you the constraints are not necessarily being imposed by the environment on you,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
You have a perception of how things should pan out, and you have a very strong point of view on it, right? This is how things have to pan out, right? Now, in that context, it is quite possible that you try to solve for a problem that requires a specialist. Let me give another example. When we were building Ola Play, at that point in time, there were conversations around the fact that there could be connection drops
Right,
when
right.
somebody sort of going up. How do you make sure that it's seamless? So one of the thought process was, can we create a car network where every passenger who's on a Ola Play could share their network with some other vehicle, and the communication would happen at a particular layer of the network. Okay. Now this problem statement demanded somebody who has a deep understanding of networking. It could
Hmm.
not be end up. It could not be something that could have ended up being solved by a regular person, sort of just making an entry into, let's say, computer science, saying,
Right,
right?
right.
Now, the beauty lies hence in trying and peeling the onion to the extent that you can
Mhm,
towards
mhm.
translating what might look like a blob of an idea to something more concrete, right? Uh, the example of human slightly different, you already know that what you don't know is the troubles these guys went through. That you
Right,
figure out when
right,
you're sort of
right.
scaling and you're sort of clocking 10 million. There's a transactions and you have all of these different kinds of network speed, jitter, etc. You'll figure that out over time, but you broadly know. But the challenge in my mind comes in terms of org structure when you have an idea and it's hard, but
Mhm.
you haven't really spent enough time figuring out the nuts and bolts of it. So if you do figure out the nuts and bolts of it, then you can do a lot more justice towards the right kind of people that you're hiring.
Right.
Do you need an infrastructure layer, for example? Do you need a network layer in my previous example, right? Do you need a team that do you need a lab, for example, where you are trying some of these things out? Where in the order of priority is this?
Right,
Is
right.
this something that we would end up doing once we let's say get some sort of a PMF, right? I think I think those conversations are important, and that should direct the structure of the organization, right?
I
I was
understand.
like I was saying, the search team was a 4-member team. At some point in time, it evolved into a 120-member odd engineering team, right? With auto suggest being a different team, with intent being a different team, ranking, and the entire index, right? So it evolves, right, over time, and you end up having you sort of either have clarity on day zero, or where you want to plan accordingly, right?
And
But
tell me something. So one additional thing that I just want to understand here is, at least so I worked in operations. I've also worked on the commercial side in some of my previous roles before VC, and I always
mm-hmm.
remember there that getting headcounts, which
Mm-hmm.
is whether I wanted an additional technician on the shop floor, or I wanted an additional sales manager and pharma rep in the market, was very much dictated by the budget that finance would allocate me for these headcounts. Right, there was
Mm-hmm.
always a pressure to maintain the people cost, because it was such a big contributor to the overall margin profile of whatever we were doing,
100%.
right? I want
100%.
to understand if the same logic, right? Like you said, like this particular capability such as auto suggest has now become enough of a feature or enough of a criticality that it links
Hmm.
to revenue in a certain way that I can
Hmm.
dedicate three people to it, right? Whereas
Hmm.
previously four of us were doing everything within search for a certain
Hmm.
period of time, right? So just
Hmm.
also quickly understand that the same logic from
Hmm.
a head counting perspective, from a budgeting perspective, also apply in the technology organizations you worked at, and that these
Hmm.
roles, these functions, they have to sort of earn their ROI to being able to allocate more resources and more people. Or
Hmm.
is it
Hmm.
a little bit more amorphous that the tech org as a
Hmm.
whole is what is looked at, and
Hmm.
it's not really that detailed. Okay, you can have three people for this, four people for that, five people for that. You can have 100 people overall. You decide now how you want to allocate them. Just curious to get an insight.
See, sure. See, yeah. See, this is not a 0-1 answer, and I'll
Hmm.
tell you why. And
Hmm.
I mean no, I'm sort of not being classist in any way, sort of making this comment around the fact that when it comes to software engineering specifically, and some of those nuances also exist when it comes to, some of the other areas of computer science, but in software, there are tangibles and there are certain intangibles.
Intangibles. Sure.
Okay. There are going to be, and there could be problems that you're solving for which are very, very pointed. There could be point problems that I want to build a website in today's world, right? And, in today's world, it sounds like a bit of a point problem. Okay. Now, when I'm trying to build a website, I could end up building a website that does what I wanted it to do, and end of story. Or I could end up building a platform capability
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that allows me to create as many different kinds of websites as I want.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
so the platform capability is a bit of an intangible.
Right.
Now leaders with foresight would look at what they have at their hand uh, with the right kind of understanding. When I'm saying at their hand, I don't necessarily mean the software, I mean the people.
Hmm.
Ultimately, because it's the people who build the
Of
software.
course.
Uh, Towards how are they looking at it? Are they really looking at it as a bit of a, is it just a cost equation that, you end up going from point A to point B, build a website? Or are we looking at a capability that can end up churning as many websites as you want, right? Uh, um, and hence, the answer is slightly nebulous in the sense that depending, if I oversimplify it, I would say it depends, right? In the sense that, it really depends on the kind of organization and how they view technology.
Sure.
I
Sure.
think
Sure.
tech first organizations, uh, there's a term which is used to, which is enabled. I'm like, what is enabled, man? Everything is technology today, right? At the end of the day, now how? I mean, there could be, teams that are helping you automate an Excel sheet, right, to generate some sort of a report. Okay, and that's enough for your business. And anything else is an overkill, and that's your outlook, and I completely respect that, right? But then there could be, somebody else who has a different kind of problem, and in that context, how are you viewing technology, right? Are you looking at it as a competitive advantage?
I think that makes sense.
A lot of respect for, in that context, and going back to the search example, we could have continued to do text match, and people could have continued to search for, red shoes, and they would have continued to get red tape shoes, and that's okay. They would figure out there's a red shoe somewhere down there, right?
Right.
That's fine.
Right.
But why would we want to invest? Why does it make any sense to invest 110 member team in search, right? So yeah, so that's the answer. I mean, really depends on how you view, your problem statement.
Got
And
it.
this is true specifically in the context of the area that we're sort of discussing at this point, and could be true elsewhere as well. But
Mhm, mhm,
I don't have a very strong point of view on the other areas.